education in a scientific society may, I think, be best conceived after the analogy of the education provided by the Jesuits. The Jesuits provided one sort of education for the boys who were to become ordinary men of the world, and another for those who were to become members of the Society of Jesus. In like manner, the scientific rulers will provide one kind of education for ordinary men and women, and another for those who are to become holders of scientific power. Ordinary men and women will be expected to be docile, industrious, punctual, thoughtless, and contented. Of these qualities, probably contentment will be considered the most important. In order to produce it, all the researches of psychoanalysis, behaviorism, and biochemistry will be brought into play. Bertrand Russell, 1931.
Behaviorism and psychoanalysis. From the scientific outlook, as a technique for acquiring power, behaviorism is, I think, superior to psychoanalysis. It embodies the methods which have always been adopted by those who train animals or drill soldiers. It utilizes the force of habit, the strength of which has always been recognized. And, as we saw when we were considering Pavlov, it makes it possible both to cause and to cure neurasthenia and hysteria. The conflicts which appear in psychoanalysis as emotional, reappear in behaviorism as conflicts between habits, or between a habit and a reflex. If a child were severely beaten every time it sneezed, it is probable that a fantasy world would in time build itself up in his mind around the conception of sneezing. He would dream of heaven as a place where the spirits of the blessed sneeze unceasingly, or on the contrary he might think of hell as a place of punishment for those who live in open sternutation. In this sort of way the problems brought to the fore by psychoanalysis can, I think, be dealt with on behaviorist lines. At the same time it should be admitted that these problems, whose importance is very great, would probably not have come to the fore but for the psychoanalytic approach. For the practical purposes of educational technique, I think it will be found that the educator should behave as a psychoanalyst when he is concerned with matters touching powerful instincts, but as a behaviorist in matters which a child views as emotionally unimportant. For example, affection for parents should be viewed in the psychoanalytic manner, but brushing teeth in the behaviorist manner. The most important applications of psychoanalytic theory are to education. These applications are as yet in an experimental stage, and, owing to the hostility of the authorities, they can only be made on a very small scale. It is, however, already evident that moral and emotional education has hitherto been conducted on wrong lines, and has produced maladjustments which have been sources of cruelty, timidity, stupidity, and other unfortunate mental characteristics. I think it possible that psychoanalytic theory may be absorbed into something more scientific, but I do not doubt that something of what psychoanalysis has to suggest in regard to education will be found permanently valid and of immense importance. Physiological manipulation. So far, no experiments have been made to test the effect of X-rays on the human embryo. I imagine that such experiments would be illegal, in common with many others that might make valuable additions to our knowledge. Sooner or later, however, probably in Russia, such experiments will be made. If science continues to advance as fast as it has done recently, we may hope, before the end of the present century, to discover ways of beneficially influencing the human embryo, not only as regards those acquired characters which cannot be inherited because they do not affect the chromosomes, but also as regards the chromosomes themselves. It is likely that this result will only be achieved after a number of unsuccessful experiments leading to the birth of idiots and monstrosities. But would this be too high a price to pay for the discovery of a method by which, within one generation, the whole human race could be rendered intelligent? Perhaps by a suitable choice of chemicals to be injected into the uterus it may become possible to turn a child into a mathematician, a poet, a biologist, or even a politician, and to ensure that all his posterity shall do likewise unless prevented by counter-irritant chemicals. So far we have been considering those ways of influencing the mental life which proceed by mental means as in psychoanalysis, or by means of the conditioned reflex as in behaviorism. There are, however, other methods which may in time prove of immense importance. These are the methods which operate through physiological means, such as the administering of drugs. The curing of cretinism by means of iodine is so far the most remarkable of these methods. In Switzerland, all salt for human consumption is obliged by law to be iodized, and this measure has been found adequate as a preventive of cretinism. The work of Cannon and others concerning the influence of the ductless glands upon the emotions has become widely known, and it is clear that by administering artificially the substances which the ductless glands provide, a profound effect can be produced upon temperament and character. The effects of alcohol, opium, and various other drugs have long been familiar, but these effects are on the balance harmful unless the drug is taken with unusual moderation. There is, however, no a priori reason why drugs should not be discovered which have a wholly beneficial effect. I have never myself observed any but good effects to flow from the drinking of tea, at any rate if it is China tea. It is possible also that psychological marvels may become possible through prenatal treatment. One of the most eminent philosophers of our day regards his superiority to his brothers, perhaps humorously, as due to the fact that shortly before his birth his mother was in a carriage which rolled down the Simplon in an accident. I do not suggest that this method should be adopted in the hope of turning us all into philosophers, but perhaps in time we shall discover some more peaceable means of endowing the fetus with intelligence. Education used to begin at 8 years old with the learning of the Latin declensions. Now, under the influence of psychoanalysis, it begins at birth. It is to be expected that with the advance of experimental embryology the important part of education will be found to be prenatal. This is already the case with fishes and newts, but in regard to them the scientist is not hampered by education authorities. The power of psychological technique to mold the mentality of the individual is still in its infancy, and is not yet fully realized. There can, I think, be little doubt that it will increase enormously in the near future. Science has given us, in succession, power over inanimate nature, power over plants and animals, and finally power over human beings. Each power involves its own kinds of dangers, and perhaps the dangers involved in power over human beings are the greatest, but that is a matter that we will consider at a later stage. Whether men will be happy in the paradise I do not know. Perhaps biochemistry will show us how to make any man happy provided he has the necessaries of life. Perhaps dangerous sports will be organized for those whom boredom would otherwise turn into anarchists. Perhaps sport will take over the cruelty which will have been banished from politics. Perhaps football will be replaced by play battles in the air in which death will be the penalty of defeat. They will not mind having to seek it in a trivial cause. To fall through the air before a million spectators may come to be thought a glorious death, even if it may be that in some such way a safety valve can be provided for the anarchic and violent forces in human nature. Or again, it may be that by wise education and suitable diet, men may be cured of all their unruly impulses, and all life may become as quiet as a Sunday school. Bertrand Russell would later write in a similar book entitled The Impact of Science on Society, that it is to be expected that advances in physiology and psychology will give governments much more control over individual mentality than they now have even in totalitarian countries. Fitch laid it down that education should aim at destroying free will, so that, after pupils have left school, they shall be incapable, throughout the rest of their lives, of thinking or acting otherwise than as their schoolmasters would have wished. But in his day, this was an unattainable ideal. What he regarded as the best system in existence produced Karl Marx. In future such failures are not likely to occur where there is dictatorship. Diet, injections, and injunctions will combine, from a very early age, to produce the sort of character and the sort of beliefs that the authorities consider desirable, and any serious criticism of the powers that be will become psychologically impossible. Even if all are miserable, all will believe themselves happy, because the government will tell them that they are so.